I don't like telling this story, and most people don't believe it when I do. It brings back too many painful memories. Memories that I've been running away from since I was a 10-year-old boy. I'd been called a devil, a murderer, a child just desperate for attention. I'm 40 now, and I'm sure people still question my sanity. I even question my sanity. It's been 30 years, but I will never forget what happened in that house. I will never forget what I heard, what I saw. I saw things and heard things that no living person should see. Things that would leave a scar that can never heal, and things that would leave you questioning your sanity. I will warn you, this true story is not for the faint of heart. It was in Ohio, 1985, when we moved into the house. My mother was looking for a fresh start after my father's abusive acts became too much for her to bear. He never touched me or my sister, Hannah, in any harmful way, but he and my mother would go at it almost every night. My mother would be left with a black eye and a swollen lip. I pretended like I didn't know what was going on. I regret that now. When we first arrived at the house, I could tell that it was really old. The windows were dusty, the paint was weathered and peeling off, and the grass stood almost as tall as I did. It looked abandoned, as if we were the first people to live there in decades. There was also an old swing in the back, and behind that was a pond that held dirty water with a greenish colour. The fence would creak as you opened it, as did the stairs. The first 2 months were silent, nothing really out of the ordinary, but I noticed something that seemed strange to me. I was in the house looking through the window to make sure that Hannah was okay being alone in the backyard. She was on the swing set, but oddly, the swing next to her was moving back and forth, as if someone was there with her. But there was no one there. Nobody but Hannah. I figured it was probably the wind. I went out there because I didn't want her out there alone. I was very protective for my sister. When I sent her inside, I stayed out there for about a minute, and I thought maybe I was imagining things because I saw someone in the hallway window. They looked down right at me. I couldn't see their face. Maybe it was Hannah. Maybe it wasn't. It wasn't really until the next night when things got frightening. Hannah's screaming echoed through the house in the middle of the night. My mother and I woke up and quickly ran to her. It sounded as if someone were attacking her, but we didn't see anyone. She was just screaming at the top of her lungs, pointing up at the ceiling. "She's trying to drown me," she screamed more than once. We didn't see anything, but she saw something at night. Something was there. At that night, things started getting weird. I've heard footsteps echoing through the house, and I know this is going to sound weird, but I've heard someone singing. It sounded like a young girl, and I know it wasn't Hannah because it sounded nothing like her. I was laying in my bed when I heard it. It must have been around midnight because everyone else was asleep. She sung it over and over again.
The birds are singing, singing, singing. Go to bed, go to bed. I'll see you in the morning, morning, morning. Now rest your head, rest your head.
It got louder and louder. It sounded as if they were coming toward me. They were getting closer and closer until eventually they were right at my door. I heard water dripping. It sounds strange, but I know what I heard. The singing stopped suddenly, and all I could hear was the water dripping. Then, everything became silent. The doorknob started turning just slightly. I hid under my covers, and eventually, whoever it was or whatever it was had left. That wasn't the only time I had a weird experience like that late at night. I've also heard whispers. Most of the time, I heard them coming from the basement. I never understood what the whisperer was saying, but one night I heard them loud and clear. I was asleep. I heard footsteps in my room. It felt like someone was watching me, like someone was sitting right at the edge of my bed. I lay there with my eyes closed, hoping it'd go away. Then it whispered, "Who are you?" I didn't reply. I didn't want to make a habit out of talking to things I couldn't see. It sounded like a woman. I guess it left afterwards because I didn't hear anything else. I was horrified by what was going on in the house. I tried to explain it to my mother, but she never believed me. She claimed I was dreaming, and I almost believed that maybe I was dreaming. My mother seemed distant. She wasn't the same person anymore. I was worried about Hannah as well. She must have been traumatized by what she saw that night. I loved my sister. We did a lot together, but she became distant as well. One day, I walked past the room. I heard her singing. It was the same song as before. I walked in a room, and she stopped singing. She was sitting on the floor, drawing as usual. "Where did you learn that song from, Hannah?" I asked her. "I learnt it from my friend," she replied, pointing at the corner of the room. I looked around the room, but I didn't see anyone or anything. I noticed a drawing, and it was really strange. She drew herself sitting on the swing, and next to her was another girl. "Who is that girl you drew?" I asked her. "That's my friend. Her name is Maddie." I figured she had an imaginary friend. She was 6 years old, so that was normal. But that didn't explain the song. "Is she the one who taught you the song?" She shook her head yes. "Her mother used to sing it to her every night," she told me. "And she still does sometimes." "Well, where is she now?" I asked her. She dropped her crayon and stood up off the floor. "She's behind you." It was then that I felt a cool breeze rush through my body. I turned around slowly, just to see myself through the mirror that hung against the wall. That's when I saw her. She was only there for less than 2 seconds, standing to the right of me and drenched in water. She looked young, around 6, the same age as Hannah. I wasn't as scared as I should have been. I asked Hannah if she was the girl who was on the ceiling that one night. She said no, and that the one who was on the ceiling was Maddie's mother. She said that her mother was evil and that she would kill us if we told anybody about her, the same way she killed Maddie. I wasn't scared until then. I wanted to tell my mother, but I'm sure she wouldn't have believed me anyway. I just wanted to protect my sister, so I said no word about it to anyone. I didn't think that a ghost could do any physical harm, but I was 10 at the time. I didn't know much about ghosts. The only thing I knew about them was that there were people who were once living. Later that day, I was walking past the basement when I heard the laughter of a young girl. It sounded like Hannah, so I walked down the stairs. She was sitting alone in the middle of the basement. "You shouldn't be down here by yourself, Hannah," I said to her. "I'm not by myself," she said. She had one of those old jewelry boxes with the ballerina that would twirl and play music when you opened it. "What are you doing down here?" I asked her. "Maddie wanted to show me her jewelry box." I looked around. I didn't see anybody. Not that I wanted to. I felt uneasy, like somebody was watching me. Somebody was there. "We have to go, now!" I yelled. "We need to get upstairs." I just didn't want to be down that basement. "Shh," she whispered. "You're gonna wake her mother." "Get up, Hannah!" I yelled. I heard a noise. It came from the other room of the basement. Hannah started crying. I could see the fear in her eyes. She stood up on her feet, dropping the jewelry box. "Danny," she cried, pointing behind me. "She's behind you." My heart popped out of my chest. I remember shaking and my heart beating at a rapid pace as I slowly turned around. I froze in fear for a few seconds. She was there. She had long black hair and was wearing a black gown. Her face was pale and her eyes were pitch black. It was like looking in the eyes of death itself. I grabbed Hannah and we ran upstairs to our mother. I wasn't sure if she believed us. She told us to stay out of the basement and that was it. The face still haunts me to this day. Hours after that frightening experience, I lay awake in my bed as I couldn't sleep. It was past midnight, so everyone else was asleep. I heard music coming from outside my room. I got out of bed, thinking maybe it was Hannah. I peeked out my door, but I didn't see anyone. I walked down the hallway, and on the floor, in front of Hannah's room, was the jewelry box from the basement. I watched as the ballerina twirled around and around and around. Everything was like in slow motion. I became lightheaded. The air was cold and heavy. Somebody was watching me. I heard somebody singing that same song. It wasn't a young girl this time. It was a woman. The singing was coming from Hannah's room. I opened the door. The singing stopped, and I didn't see anyone. Hannah was fast asleep. I asked her about it the next day, but she had absolutely no idea what I was talking about. Weeks after that incident was when everything took a turn for the worst. Just like before, she was screaming in the top of her lungs in the middle of the night. We ran to her, my mother and I. "She's trying to drown me," she screamed. "She's trying to drown me." "Who?" my mother asked. "Who are you talking about?" Hannah stopped screaming and stood from her bed. She was shaking. Her face was pale and her voice became weak. Her eyes were wide as she stood there, almost like she was frozen, like she couldn't move. "She's behind the door," she whispered suddenly, pointing at the door with a horrifying look in her eyes. Bam! The door slammed shut, and I found myself alone, outside in the hallway. They were screaming. My mother and my sister were screaming, and there was nothing I could do. I tried to open the door, but it was stuck. Let me in! Let me in! I yelled. I kicked and I punched because that was all I could do. They were screaming as loud as they could until suddenly the screaming stopped. Mom? Hannah? I yelled out. No answer. They were dead. My mother and sister were dead. That's all I could think.
The birds are singing, singing, singing. Go to bed, go to bed. I'll see you in the morning, morning, morning. Now rest your head, rest your head.
It sounded like my mother. I heard the door unlock from the other side. I opened it slowly to find my mother sitting in the middle of the bed, singing to Hannah, who was fast asleep. She then stood up. I saw the emptiness in her eyes as she walked by me, as if I weren't even there. I was beyond confused. It just didn't make any sense. I woke up the next morning to a loud noise coming from the kitchen. I ran downstairs to see my mother making breakfast, soaking wet and singing that damn song. Why are you wet, Mother? I asked. She said nothing. Where's Hannah? Who are you? She whispered. It's me, Mother. I'm your son. She looked at me, staring into my eyes as if she was stealing my soul. She smiled, a crooked, evil smile I never saw before. I don't have a son, she said. Now run along. Maddie isn't available. She walked down the basement and closed the door. After less than a minute, I heard a loud noise that echoed from the basement. I ran upstairs to Hannah's room, searching everywhere for her. She wasn't in there. I walked out into the hall, and that's when I saw her walk down the stairs. I breathed a sigh of relief. I thought she was dead. I chased after her. She led me outside, but I lost her as I was shuffling through the tall grass. I ran to the backyard, thinking she might be playing on the swing set. I didn't see her, but the swings were both swinging rapidly. I heard laughter. It sounded like two young girls. One of them actually sounded like Hannah, but I couldn't see anyone. I walked behind the swing set, and that's when I saw her face. She was floating, lifeless, face down in the pond. I heard a voice as it echoed with the wind. She was singing.
The birds are singing, singing, singing. Go to bed, go to bed. I'll see you in the morning, morning, morning. Now rest your head, rest your head.
My parents died in a car crash when I was 14. Don't feel bad for me or anything. I've made my peace with that years ago. Life with them was never great, but I do miss them. It's just that if they taught me one thing, it's not to sit around wallowing in self-pity. I just wish they hadn't sent me to live with Aunt Louise. Anyone have that one family member that's just a little strange, a little cut off from the rest of the family? Aunt Louise was ours. She was also our closest living relative. Dad's family lived on the other side of the continent. Mom's parents were both dead, and she was an only child. Aunt Louise, her mother's sister actually, so my great aunt, lived just an hour from where we did. When my folks were alive, we rarely visited Aunt Louise, and to be perfectly honest, I half expected her to refuse to take me in. I was fully prepared to become a ward of the state, or move across the country as soon as I heard that Children and Family Services had contacted her about taking me in. But she accepted. I'm not sure how willingly or graciously, because I wasn't privy to the phone conversation where she agreed to take me. I was surprised though, at how nice she was to me the first 3 days I was there. I want to make something very clear. While Aunt Louise was cranky, odd, eccentric, uncouth, and several other less flattering adjectives, she wasn't a complete asshole. She had a rather abrupt, even abrasive way of speaking, but she wasn't cruel. I'd never taken the time to really get to know her during my initial 14 years, but I could tell that she mostly kept to herself and didn't particularly like people. So naturally, I assumed she was a reclusive hermit. Really, what surprised me the most when I first moved in, it was how normal everything seemed, at least at first. Aunt Louise cooked, cleaned, watched TV, talked to neighbours on the phone, etc., just like anyone else would, and she told me right away that she had little in the way of expectations from me, or at least none that my parents wouldn't have. Don't stay out too late, let her know if you're going to be late coming home, finish your homework before you watch TV, clean up after yourself, etc. There was one rule, however, that was strange, and it stood out from the other rules in how strange it was. At first I tried not to worry about it. Odd people sometimes have peculiarities. I initially thought that was all this was. I was wrong. She insisted that any time I entered or left a room, I was to shut the door behind me right away. It didn't matter if I was going to be in that room for a few seconds. If I entered a room, I was expected to immediately shut the door, and the same was true if I left. I often forgot this rule in my first week or so there. She never failed to remind me of it. "Shut that damn door," she would yell, at any time I forgot. It never seemed to matter where she was in the house. She could always tell when I had not shut the door just after opening it. Her house was old, and my understanding is that she was not the first owner. She had lived in it since Mom was a girl. I had no idea how old it was. It could have easily been over 100. Judging by its design and layout, it had 2 floors, a basement, and a sub-basement. That last floor threw me for a bit of a loop when I discovered it existed. I was washing a load of my clothes when I noticed the door, closed, naturally, in the far wall of the utility room. The basement was unfinished, with mostly dirt flooring and bits of bobs stacked or piled or shelved everywhere. The only room you could really walk through without fear of stepping on something or knocking over a stack of pile was this laundry room, which was also the only tiled floor down there. The door I found in the basement had a board laid across it, easily movable. It was as if Aunt Louise wanted a board there, but not one she couldn't get past, if need be. My curiosity overtook me the second time I saw it, and I slid the board away from the door and tried it. It was locked. This didn't strike me as strange right away. That is, until I realized that this was the only room in the house, other than the doors leading outside, that Aunt Louise kept locked. I asked her about it one day. She was cooking. "The door in the basement?" she answered. "That's the sub-basement. Not much down there. I mainly keep my preserves down there. It's cool enough for them to keep." "Right," I answered. This didn't really explain why she kept it locked. "So, if I ever wanted to take a look around down there, for the love of Christ, boy, why would you want to do that?" I noticed with that response that her face had changed. Aunt Louise mostly wore the same expression, a scowl, like someone had tracked mud on a freshly shampooed carpet. Again, she wasn't as nasty as her expression indicated, but it was the expression she was most used to making, apparently. But when she responded to my desire to see what was behind that door, her eyebrows raised and her mouth quivered for just a second before answering. It was so slight, others might not have noticed it, but by that time, I knew enough about Aunt Louise to equate that with a scream of horror. I knew then that I had to see what was behind that door. I've always been the curious type, you see. I've never been able to stay away from something that aroused my curiosity, even if my good sense told me better. I wanted nothing more after that than to see what was in that sub-basement. But how was I to get around the lock? That was going to be an issue. Aunt Louise kept all her keys on a single ring. There weren't that many of them, but I figured if the key to that sub-basement was anywhere, it was there. I just had to find a way to take it from her. This turned out to not be so simple. For one thing, it was not possible to get around the house without being heard. I couldn't sneak from my bedroom to hers in order to sneak the keys without opening and closing all the doors between us. Mine, the door in the far part of the hallway, and hers. Believe me, even if I simply left all the doors open, she somehow knew. I once had to go to the bathroom in the night, and I forgot to close the hallway door. I just made it to the bathroom when I hear her yell, even while asleep. "Shut that damn door!" I hurriedly turned back and went to close the hallway door, forgetting to close the bathroom door, and I heard it again. "Shut that damn door!" For that matter, Aunt Louise's room had a squeaky door that also had a catch to it, so when she opened it, it sounded like a long squeal. There was no opening of her door without her noticing. So I forgot about the sub-basement door for a while. I placed my curiosity on the back burner and just tried to get along with the taciturn old woman for a while. Life got a bit easier. As long as I remembered to keep all the doors shut at all times, the two of us got along famously. She didn't even get in my face about things, and I didn't get in hers. It was a pretty silent house, but one that I got used to living in. I didn't even think it was strange anymore that every part of the house that won access through a door always had its door shut. It would have struck me as more odd if any doorway was ever left open. Which brings me to the day Aunt Louise fell asleep while watching The Price is Right. It was a summer day and pretty hot. Louise was slightly less worried about windows being open than doors, but she still tended to only open one at a time, and today she had just one open. One that wasn't doing much at all to cool down a boxed-in house that had zero room airflow thanks to Aunt Louise's chief eccentricity. So naturally, she fell asleep. And I saw my chance. Her purse was at her feet. I was sitting in the chair directly beside hers, reading an Avengers comic book, and trying to ignore the repeated calls of, "Come on down," from the TV. I looked over at her, and saw that she was in a deep doze. Her hearing wasn't the greatest, even when she was awake, though she was far from deaf. But I figured, in her snooze, there would be little chance she would hear the tiny noise of me rifling through her purse. I found her keys almost immediately and headed for the stairwell. If she woke up when I opened the door, I would just claim I was doing a load of laundry. But she was unlikely to wake up unless I forgot to close the door, which by now I never did. I headed down the stairs, for some reason tiptoeing even though I wasn't yet at the place where I had been shut out from. I felt absurdly guilty, despite the fact that Aunt Louise had never expressly forbidden me from doing what I was now doing. The door to the basement was closed, of course, but unlocked as always. I ducked through and closed it, waiting a few minutes, listening for a shifting of Aunt Louise's frame in her chair, indicating she was getting up, or perhaps a voice calling to ask why I was in the basement. Quietly, I crept for the laundry room, opened the door, and closed it just as quick, slipping inside. I felt for the chain pull for the light and pulled it. Low, eerie light flickered through the room. I'd never thought of the lighting here as eerie before, but I did now. There was something about this entire endeavour that felt wrong. But my curiosity overrode my sense of caution, and I crept forward to the door and slid the board away from it. Aunt Louise had apparently put it back in place after the last time I had done this. The question of why she had done so played in my brain for a moment, but I ignored it and brought out the keyring. I found the right key on the third try and heard a loud chuck of the lock sliding away. I froze, heart beating in my chest, waiting to hear a cry from upstairs. Nothing. The door opened silently as a ghost. There wasn't any light to illuminate the staircase beyond. I didn't even see a chain pull for the light on the stairs. My brain was screaming at the rest of my body to turn around and forget this little endeavour, but I paid no heed and crept down the stairs, feeling along the wall for guidance. It turned out there was a tiny amount of light coming through vents in the ceiling. It wasn't much, but I could see that there was a pull-string light, just a few feet from the foot of the stairs. Stupid place to put it. It should be at the landing. But I walked down what appeared to be a fairly compact hallway and pulled the string. If possible, the light that flickered on was lower than the light from the laundry room. I could barely tell I'd turned it on. I looked around and saw that, indeed, Aunt Louise had rows of preserves down here. I was somewhat disappointed at the mundane answer to the mystery. For a moment, it seemed that the secret sub-basement was exactly what it was supposed to be. Except, I could feel a puff of warmish breeze that should not be possible down on the hard, packed earthen walls and cooler, subterranean air. The sense of wrongness was still there, and still strong. And I realised that the long row of shelves holding the jars ended in a doorway at the end. A doorway that didn't have a door. I crept forward, arms in front of me, stepping carefully. The room beyond the door was dark and smelled musty. I couldn't feel a source of slightly warm air that was brushing against my skin, but I was noticing that the closer I got to that room, the warmer the air became. By the time I was at the mouth of the tunnel, somehow I'd started thinking of this place as a tunnel by this time, the air wasn't just warm, it was humid. The smell went from musty to mouldy, to something even worse. I was assailed by that sense of wrongness, stronger than ever. I had to get out of there. Why was I walking even closer? There wasn't much light, but I could see the outline of another door on the other side of the room. It was ajar. Seeing a door ajar in Aunt Louise's house was like seeing a shattered window in anyone else's. It was wrong. It was not meant to be. But then, I wasn't precisely in Aunt Louise's house anymore, was I? This tunnel was not built for this house. I knew that in my soul. It was here before. Long before. This was a place that had only become attached to Aunt Louise's house by short-sighted builders, unaware of what they had unearthed. What they should have left buried. It took me a moment to realise that the room beyond, the very room I was about to step into, was moving. The light was too dim to see what was happening, but there was motion beyond it. Unceasing, slow, lazy motion. All along the walls, the floor. I could hear a slight squelching noise from its every corner. Things were crawling, expanding their pulpous flesh, and looking at me, daring me to cross that floor and shut the door on the far side, forever closing out what might be coming through it. I heard sucking sounds, some formless, gelatinous presence stretching and flexed in the darkness. In that moment, a sense of understanding came to me. I was not the first person to stand at this door that could not be closed. Not the first person to see the other door, the one that was not meant to be, standing open on the other side, and knowing that it always would, until someone worked up the courage to cross the threshold and close it. Aunt Louise had not had the courage, so she had fled, and kept every door in the house closed at all times, hoping against hope that keeping her doors closed at all times would alert her when whatever was beyond that damn door finally came for her. I didn't have the courage either. I turned and fled, and never looked back. When I was 16, I moved out of Aunt Louise's and into a halfway house. Once I was 18, I got a job upstate and moved there. I never went back to Aunt Louise's and never called her. Tried hard to not even think about her. But I haven't been successful. I still think back to the day I stood at that doorway, about the squelching, wriggling things that waited in the darkness. And I wonder if Aunt Louise ever found the strength to cross the room and shut that damn door. I noticed that there are quite a few posts about the deep web here, and I find a lot of the stories doubtful. As someone who has spent years on the deep web, primarily to get drugs and use anonymous message boards, I want to clear up some of the things surrounding this. Before I start, I don't recommend that you use the deep web. Even if you find some sites that work, most of the more well-known ones are either inactive or shut down, I don't recommend getting too deep into it. You'll get addicted to using the deep web if you keep using it, because the deeper you get, the more you know. The more you know, the more you want to know, so on and so on. I would like to say that the deep web consists of a lot of criminals, and you should not mess with criminals, so watch your step. Think about the deep web as a chasm full of water. Different fish swim in different depths. The deeper they are, the darker things they deal with. There's no real official hierarchy, so take it with a grain of salt. This is based upon my personal experiences with the deep web, and the further down it is, the harder it is to access. Let's start off with step 1. Step 1. Drug dealers, weird porn, anonymous message boards, mostly without child pornography, arms dealers, stolen goods, prostitutes, etc. Not much to say here. Most of these sites can be accessed with a regular Tor browser. Step 2. The con artists and the organizations roam here. When I say organizations, I don't mean Microsoft or Google, but extremists and larger gangs. Usually their message boards are either completely inaccessible or heavily secured. So don't bother accessing these if you're a layman. It's probably best to stay out of their business anyway. The con artists tend to be people who make themselves out to be hitmen and contraband dealers. Either they're cops, or just con artists who want you to waste their money on them. Hitmen are rare to come by on the deep web, and they don't roam around on sites that can be accessed by a regular Tor client. Trust me, I've done my research. Step 3. Light kiddie porn message boards and gore sites. Now this is where you should definitely just get lost. Don't go there. The kiddie porn message boards is people trading pictures, selling and buying for bitcoins or other cryptocurrencies, mostly Bitcoin though. From what I saw, it was less abuse and mostly just naked children. Now the gore sites aren't like LiveLeak or Best Gore, but everything ranging from HD, talking professional photography, torture movies, to cell phone pictures of people getting beaten up. It might not sound bad, but it contains very twisted stuff. There's a category of gore dedicated to skull raping alive humans. This is where they drill into the victim's skull and then screw their brains out until the person dies. When people go missing, they might end up here, I imagine. It's mostly brown and Hispanic people doing it. Seems to be a low abundance of white people on the site. I imagine that the ones that are there are unlucky tourists. Now, if you figured out how to get here, I have one piece of advice. Avoid posting anything unless you really know what you're doing. People on gore boards are ruthless, and you really don't want to mess around there. Watching is fine, but be quiet. Step 4 is the hacking boards, passworded boards, and hardcore child pornography. Illegal services like legit hitmen also roam here. So this is where you are very careful. Hacking boards are usually pretty locked, but the more open ones tend to discuss how to create effective malware and good hacking software. For someone with a somewhat tech-savvy background, I can assure you that these guys are definitely professionals. I have no idea what the closed hacking boards spend their time doing, but imagine it's based around organising huge hacking attacks and so. Nobody has any idea what goes on in the passworded board. It is theorized that they are child pornography forums, or that they are boards linked to open boards. Hardcore child pornography is pretty self-explanatory. Usually it involves penetration, but not actual abuse. The adults in the videos seem to love their children more than they hate them. It's kind of like a porn hub for pedophiles. I don't really condone that stuff, but with the amount of stuff I've seen on the deep web, I'm starting not to care. Hitmen are very obscure and very strict, so if you want to place a hit on someone, you do it exactly like you tell them to, and if you don't, they won't do it. Step 5 is the place that really takes the cake. It's nearly impossible to access for a layman, and I won't tell you how to do it. It doesn't use onion addresses. All I'll say is that if people say they've been there apparently, don't trust that they're just regular people. There are streaming sites, similar to Twitch.tv, however much laggier and has way simpler layouts, dedicated to abusing people and animals in strange ways. Most of the rooms I've been in have been relatively cheap. You pay $50 to $100, about 0.1 to 0.2 bitcoins, to have people tortured your way. The layout is pretty easy to navigate. You click on a stream and you can pay to have it done. There's a 2-minute stream delay since it obviously goes through a lot of security to avoid getting busted. Like regular streaming sites, there are also popular streamers. These guys cost a whole lot more, but they use higher quality gear and do more specific tasks. For example, there was a kid, around age 5 I'd say, who got his eyeballs cauterized with a blowtorch for $2,000, or 5 bitcoins. Usually it isn't this expensive, but children don't grow on trees, so the streamers have to charge more for permanent damage. It works this way because if one person pays, let's say 4 bitcoins for having a child's foot cut off, the next person who happens to have a foot fetish can't have his needs met in the same way. There's a website called Paul's Pressure Tank. The actual URL is different, so don't bother trying. Whose name I will not mention due to safety reasons, has created a pressure tank from scratch. It has a lot of features, the obvious being manipulating pressure, but it can be heated up sort of like a brazen bull. For those who don't know what a brazen bull is, it's a bull made of brass with the hatch on top. The victim is thrown into it, and the bull is heated up. The person is then roasted to death. Inside the tank, there is a camera, and for a rather large amount of money, 2 to 5 bitcoins, you can have a person, child, teenager, adult or oldie, no discrimination, killed in exactly your way. I don't know what it's capable of, but after seeing a person being roasted alive and another killed due to high pressure, I'm not interested in seeing anymore. Allegedly, it has sprinklers that can fill the tank with liquid of your choice. Acid, hot water, urine, anything. But I'm not sure if this is true. This place also contains heavy R equivalents of child pornography sites. If you want to know more, check out Heavy R, and imagine that they're all children. This is only a microscopic part of the deep web, and there is much more to see. And there is much more I could tell you. I don't want to say more at the moment since it's already very risky of me to post this on a public site. There isn't exactly a sea of people using these sites, and it would be very easy to find me if it wasn't due to the fact that I'm hiding behind a proxy. So I will just leave this here, and I hope I cleared some things up. So a couple years back, my buddies and I tried staying in the park after closing time. Our plan was just to take pictures, nothing sinister or anything like that. We just wanted to be able to say we did it, you know? Basically, we snuck from bathroom to bathroom, corner to corner, and managed to stay there until they closed the gates and the maintenance team got to work. We were really surprised we hadn't gotten caught. It was almost strange, considering how much talking up Disney security gets. Our hearts were beating like crazy, and we sat there for a while, hiding behind a tombstone in the haunted mansion. We noticed that it's true. The Disney staff have signed their names on every single one. So, finally, we got the courage to roam about, still being careful as to not be seen. It was really eerie. The occasional guard or maintenance worker would walk by, and we would just duck or hide behind a corner. It worked. For about an hour. Of course, we couldn't keep this up for long, and yeah, they caught us. I mean, give us props for attempting and succeeding, but that's not where the story ends. So the first thing we said when they caught us was, "Are you going to take us down to the dungeon?" And we laughed. The security guard chuckled too, so the mood wasn't too dreary. He told us we weren't the first people to try sneaking after hours, but he wanted to know how we did it. We explained the situation, and he actually laughed and said that wasn't a bad plan. He told us he had to take us to the Disney jail to be further interrogated, which we thought was odd. But we figured from the beginning that if we had gotten caught, they'd take us down there. It might have been our plan all along. Maybe we wanted to see Disney catacombs more than we wanted to be in the park after hours. So he called for more workers to come and help him escort us, and we went on our way towards Toontown. Then they took us down in this elevator. Right into hell. The first thing we noticed was how expensive looking the elevator was. I didn't know if that makes sense, but it's hard to explain. It was like a stainless steel interior with mirrors all around, and the floor was this tacky red carpeting, but it looked expensive. There are only 2 buttons in this elevator, not counting the emergency buttons. One said up, the other said down. I had forgotten to mention they never handcuffed us or zip-tied our hands. They just kind of walked beside us, expecting we'd follow. Not that we would have tried to make a run for it. I mean, these people seemed decent. Like, how are we supposed to know what was going to happen? The elevator stopped and we started walking down this perfectly shining, bleached-smelling corridor. There were no doors on either side. It was just a plain, empty corridor. We walked for what seemed like an eternity, and no one was talking any longer. It was me, my friends, the security guard, and 2 other maintenance workers. Finally, we reached a heavy metal door that had a security code and card reader. One worker put in his card, the other typed in a code on the keypad. I watched the code he typed in, 121566. I only remember it because I found out later what its significance was, and it makes me laugh looking back. Strange. It's strange that I could laugh looking back. They led me and my friends into another corridor. This one had doors down the hallway walls. Each door had a little plexiglass square, about 10 by 10 inch window, at the top right corner. Looked sort of like a psych ward, to be honest. Not so much like a jail. He led us to room 1901, and inside was a single desk with, surprisingly, 3 chairs for me and each of my friends. They left us in there alone, closing the door on the way out. We sat in the chair like obedient little children and waited for them to return. But they never did. 2 hours went by, and no one came back for us. My buddy Tim went to the door and, surprisingly, it was unlocked. He didn't open it though. He was worried there'd be a guard on the outside and that they'd think we were escaping, and we weren't looking for any more trouble. So about 25 minutes went by, when we got restless and finally decided to leave the room. The hallway was empty like before. No signs of people. Nothing. We started calling out. "Hello? Is anybody here?" No one answered our calls. We noticed surveillance cameras were placed above every door, and we got to wondering if there was any living soul in this place at all. We should have left right then and there. But then again, whoever does the right thing in these kinds of situations. Every door looked the same, and each one had a specific number above it. They weren't in order like, say, rooms 1 to 10. They were scattered numbers. For example, our room had been 1901, but the door next to it was 1205. I got to thinking and finally assumed that they were just randomly chosen. We walked up the hallway and had no idea where we were going, what we were hoping to find, or even if it mattered. My other buddy, Guy, decided we should just leave. He said that if they really wanted us here, they'd have come back. And maybe it was just a scare tactic. Maybe they just wanted to trick us into thinking we were being arrested and were waiting for us outside to laugh. I felt wary of the whole situation, and Tim was just quiet the whole time, nodding his head here and there. He was more interested in looking into the door's little 10 by 10 inch windows. That wasn't a good idea. I tried to tell him, but of course, no one listens to reason when they're freaked out, and we were definitely freaked out at this point. The cameras above the door were capable of motion detection and followed us as we wandered down the desolate corridor. A little red light at the bottom of the lens blinking each second. No noise filled the air. All we heard was each other breathing. Then, it happened. We had reached the end of the hallway. Unfortunately, the door at the end had another pin code reader. I tried the pin from before, the one I saw them type in, but it was invalid. At that moment, the lights in the hallway shut off, and we heard the doors. I can still hear them to this day. The doors opened. All lining up the corridor, they made a subtle creak, and then a boom as they hit the wall beside them with force. As I said, after I entered the invalid code into the keypad, the lights shut off and the doors opened, except for the one door with a keypad. We also noticed, as the doors opened, each doorway had a little bit of light seeping from its open pathway. We stood there, stunned for a good 5 minutes, not knowing what to do. We figured we tripped some kind of alarm and that this was just protocol. A standard drill in case of an attempted escape. What were we supposed to think? So we turned the other direction, away from the locked door. A sense of panic hit all three of us for some reason, and we got the urge to run. No one agreed to running. It was like we all knew we had to, at the same time. Some sort of instinct, like a baby gazette knowing when to run from a lion. We were in a lion's den, alright. It wasn't until about the 10th door we passed that we began to look into the doorways as we passed them. Standing at the doorways were people in costume. We were running past Donalds, Mickeys, Goofies, Plutos, and all different kinds of Disney characters. It was insane, and we screamed at the top of our lungs. I know they say never look behind you as you run, but I did. They were leaving their rooms and following us. Not running, just casually walking towards us. I think that is what made it that much more terrifying. Almost like they knew we had nowhere to go. Now, I don't know if it was all in my head, just from sheer panic and fear of the moment, but I swear, I could swear on my mother's life, I heard "It's a Small World" playing over an intercom. I have a fear of dolls, and the ride always gave me the creeps my whole life. Now I could see them, the little robotic dolls, standing in the doorways as we passed. Still following were the costumed characters. The dolls weren't chasing us, thank God. I could have died from a heart attack if I had seen the dolls following suit, but they didn't. It just made the situation all that better. I mean, how many times have you been followed by a group of costume individuals, seemingly out to probably eat you alive? At least that's what I told myself to keep myself moving. Stopping meant being devoured by Donald Duck. I don't know about you, but I don't want to go out like that. Tim was crying. Guy was sweating and breathing heavily, and I just kept turning my head to see if we were being followed. And of course, we were. I'm not sure how many doors we had passed at this point, or if there really were different characters at each door, but I knew that this hallway had to end at some point, and we were getting the hell out of this place pronto. Easier said than done. I looked back after another minute or two of running and noticed there was nothing behind us anymore that we could see. I heard footsteps, but figured we had gotten so far ahead that they were just still walking casually like before. The hallway was still going on for what seemed like forever, and Guy needed to stop, or he was going to faint from exhaustion. The door beside us was open, with a light on but nothing inside. I decided we would hide in there till we caught our breath and could continue onward. As we closed the door behind us, I noticed the room was 1966. Again, that meant nothing at the time. Tim was pacing the room. Guy was laying on the floor, still breathing pretty hard, and I was at the window, looking out. I saw nothing. No more music, no nothing. It was dark out, and hard to tell for sure, but I figured I would have seen figures, shadows or something. Still, I kept watch. After 15 minutes or so, Guy said he was good to go. Tim was the only one smart enough to pull out his new Razr cell phone. No signal, of course. He opened the door subtly, quietly, but heard no footsteps. Nothing was following us anymore. But we weren't taking chances. We got back to running. It only took another 7 minutes to reach the door, give or take. It had no keypad, and it was open. We entered the corridor from before, and thank God, there were no doors. We ran for the elevator and got in, pushed the up button, and stood there, looking at each other, dumbfounded as to what had just happened. None of us spoke. We just waited till the elevator opened, back to Toontown, and started making our way for the front gate. We kept a low profile, using the same duck and hide technique that had gotten us this far from the get-go. Maintenance workers and security guards were still about, but we couldn't take any more chances. Finally, Tim lost it and took off in a sprint. I couldn't imagine what had set him off, until I looked and saw that everyone in the park just stood there, staring at us with blank faces. We heard a voice over the intercom explaining that 3 fugitives had escaped from captivity and needed to be escorted back into the jails below. We booked it, catching up to Tim. Costume characters appeared from the shadows, workers and guards chasing after us. Everyone was sprinting for us. I couldn't see well, but I imagined drool dripping from their jowls. They wanted us back down there. We had escaped, and they were mad. The gate was just up ahead. The creepiest thing about it all was that, besides the voice over the intercom, the park was dead silent. No chat from the workers could be heard. Even now, as we were running for what we assumed was our lives, from the characters, the workers, the guards, no one bothered to shout after us. No one yelled. No one said, "Stop." Nothing. Just footsteps and the occasional cough from Guy. As we made it past the park's front gate, we didn't stop until we got to the parking lot. Our cars were gone, and we were left scratching our heads. We continued running down the road, which went on for miles, stopping occasionally for us to catch our breath. We made it to a little corner store, where Tim used his cell phone to call a taxi cab. When it finally arrived, we took the cab back to the hotel we were staying at, paid the fare, and went up to our rooms. In the end, the next day, we got a call from the hotel's front desk, so we headed downstairs. There were officers waiting for us. They said our car had been impounded and we needed to pay the fine. They didn't ask us any other questions, and we didn't bother telling the police anything that happened. Even now, people we tell, people who don't have a reason to disbelieve me, don't believe me. So how could an officer of the law be expected to? We didn't bother. We simply paid the fine and drove home. We didn't talk about what happened the whole drive back. It wasn't until a couple weeks later that I got myself to search up the numbers. Curiosity, I guess. As you all know, Walt Disney was born on December 5th, 1901. The room we were in was 1901, and the door next to us was 1205. Also, he died on December 15th, 1966, which was the key code the worker had put in to lead us to the main corridor. What a strange coincidence, I decided. Whether any of that was real at all, I couldn't tell you. Maybe our imaginations ran wild. We were tired. It was around 1 a.m. when we made our escape. So it's plausible that's the answer. I'll never forget it though. And I haven't been back since. My daughter, Alexis, is only 10 years old, but she likes to keep my whiskey glass full for me. If her mother was alive, she would probably scream at both of us. But she's dead now, so we content ourselves with remembering the echoes of her displeasure. Meanwhile, Alexis kneels by my recliner and brushes her doll's blonde hair. "Daddy likes to drink," she tells her doll. "And I like to pour him drinks." The doll's plastic eyes swivel up to frown at me. No, maybe that's just the alcohol. Dolls can't give the same scornful looks as deceased mothers. Another round of laughter escapes the television, reminding me that the show is funny. Thanks, studio audience. I don't think I would have known otherwise. Outside the windows of our apartment, The city lights glitter like 1,000 little candle flames. Someone has lit them just for me. Another reminder to feel something for the wife I used to know. But all I am reminded of is how many goddamn reminders the world gives us when all we want to do is forget. I want to forget the way Alexis's mother screamed as she fell. Why would she scream? That's not what someone does when they're snuffed out, exhausted. That's not the sound someone makes when they cut their body loose from the tethers of the sky, dropping like a stone into the ocean of sound that is downtown Chicago. The Throom swallowed her whole. No, she begged it to swallow her. "Daddy needs more to drink," says Alexis, laying a doll down. Those plastic, evil little eyes burn into me. I can feel its hot stare searing the flesh off my forehead, warming my skull like a stove warms a pot with brains inside. I can hear the sizzle of my mind. I can hear the thrum of the city, begging for someone else to eat. "Do it, pussy," says the doll. I'm watching her mouth now, but it's not moving the second time. Still, I know that voice by now. That weak little manufactured chirp, like a bird with a voice box. Even when Alexis isn't around to pull the string in her back, the doll speaks to me. "Do it, weakling, or do you need the same kind of push you gave your wife?" "I did not push her over the edge." Somehow, my glasses shattered on the floor where Alexis was just standing. But now she's kneeling, nursing her face with both hands. She's crying. "I didn't say you did, Papa." I know that." "I made you a drink, Dad. I thought you wanted another." My hand burns, like I just swatted a volleyball with my palm. But there are no volleyballs anywhere nearby. There's only Alexis, nursing her face and hiding her tears from me. No, that's not right. There's also the doll. "You're not fit to be a father," my wife said. She was standing at the kitchen counter, but 2 years ago. Not now. How could she be there now? Still, I can hear her voice. It's always scolding, always full of so much judgment. I look over to the kitchen counter, empty. Her gold green eyes are missing from below the ceiling lights. Her slender hands are missing from the cold countertops. Her hair, invisible. Only her voice remains now. "She makes you drinks because she knows that's all you love," says the invisible woman. The only one who refuses to die. She has quit the world, but she refuses to quit me. "Then you hit her." "Stop it," I say, because I have to say it. Because if I do not, then no one will. "I'm not doing anything, I swear," simpers Alexis from her place on the ground. No, that's not her place. I have to remember that. Her place is with the doll, with a smile on her face. But that is just another illusion, another place in another time that will never be. "It can be," says the doll. Somehow, she sat herself up. I've only just realized that I'm still standing. I've only just noticed how tall I am compared to that little doll of hers. Compared to her, I am a giant of a man. "You can have her place in the sun if you step aside." "Is that what you told her mother?" I ask, but this time inside my head, where only the doll can hear. "Is that how you convinced her to give her soul to the city?" Yes. Another burst of laughter pours out from the warm glow of the television set. Another witty line I must have missed. Suddenly, the television screen goes black, and I hear a song playing. It's soft at first, barely audible, but it gets louder as the lights begin to dim above me. The whole apartment feels darker. "Step aside," says the voice. "Let her be warm again." Suddenly the room is at my back. I can feel the wind picking up through what's left of my hair. I can't see it, but I know it's streaked with grey, whatever has not fallen out already. And I know it's not only my hair that has left me. It is not only my hair that disowns who I am. A horn peals loud and constant from below. The air is cold in my face, the balcony freezing beneath my feet. But there is a warm, just a touch, like a golden orb. Something soft and heated clasps around my hand. "Please don't," whispers Alexis. She won't look up at my face, not after what I did to her. But her voice is full and embracing, her hand so tiny as it wraps around mine. "Come back inside, Daddy." I do not know why, but I follow her back into the dimness of the apartment. Somehow, it seems a little brighter now. The television is playing again, and the soft song that once wafted through the dark has lilted away completely. But the doll is still there, looking up at me. "Soon enough," she says to me, scorn burned into her plastic, lifeless eyes. Or is it a voice that comes from somewhere else, just for me? "Soon," it says. "Soon, you will have to leave Alexis and give your life to the city below." Maybe I allowed myself to be disarmed by the fact that he came at 3 in the afternoon. He knocked very softly for a man of his stature, hulking as he was at 6'4" with wide shoulders and big, hairy knuckles. When I asked how I could help him, he reached into his coat pocket, withdrew an envelope, and held it out to me. Who wears a coat in August? I took the envelope and looked it over. His face was stamped over several times with information for the St. Louis Correctional Facility. A letter from prison. Great. I didn't know anyone in prison. Then I noticed a post-it note paperclipped to the back of the envelope. It read simply, "Please allow the courier to be present to witness the reading of this letter." I looked up at the man towering over me on the porch. Though he was large, he didn't appear threatening. If anything, his calm smile made me think he might be rather friendly. I asked if he had any clue about the contents of the letter or why his presence was necessary for the reading, but the tall man shrugged and gestured towards the foyer. I nodded and invited him in. In the kitchen, we both sat across from one another at the table. I offered him some coffee, but he silently declined. I glanced up at him one last time. I peeled the flap back and pulled out a 10-page letter, scrawled in hasty handwriting on lined yellow paper. The letter began, "You don't know me. You will likely never meet me. I am on death row at St. Louis Correctional Facility. I was locked up for the murder of my wife and 2 children. Lionel was 3. Macy was just 6 months old. I love them dearly. But I did kill them. I will admit that first and foremost. I hate myself for it, and I rot in my cell, tortured by the images of their blood dripping off my knuckles. Let me tell you my story." I looked back up at the tall man with disgust obvious on my face. His calm, soft grin didn't waver as he stared back at me. I got up to get a glass of water, then returned to the letter. The author of the letter, whose name I found was Fitz Wallard, had been incarcerated 2 weeks ago and had begun work on his letter as soon as he had access to stationery. He never explained how he got my address or why he chose me to share his story with, but the story was brutal. Fitz Wallard claimed to have been cursed. My first thought was that he suffered from schizophrenia, but he explained that he had been tested for it with no results. He insisted that a demonic spirit was attached to him. The evil spirit taunted him, tortured his every waking moment. It whispered evil deeds in his ear as he lay in bed at night. It appeared in his reflection as he walked past the mirror. The demon was constantly suggesting cruelties and filling Fitz's brain with insecurities and phobias and sinister ideas. Fitz's day-to-day life became riddled by a running commentary on the weakness of humans, the frailty of flesh, and the freedom of bloodletting. Work meetings became haunted by the demon's screeching. The spirit hissed terrible things about every face Fitz passed on the street. The worst still, though, was the demon's thoughts on Fitz's family. Called the children ungrateful degenerates. The demon told Fitz that his family didn't appreciate him, that his wife was cheating on him, that his children couldn't stand to be around him, that Fitz could never provide enough for them, that the house was a sty, that their clothes were rags, that everything Fitz had worked towards his whole life was a mediocre joke at best. For 10 pages, Fitz Willard recounted the madness that crept into his psyche, the nightmares that woke him dozens of times at night. The demon made light bulbs flicker as Fitz walked under them. He made the bathtub run red like blood. Flies gathered on the mirrors, and the demon's suggestions became more and more furious. They became demands, threats even, until one day, Fitz caved in the skulls of his 2 infant children with his bare fists before strangling his wife of 8 years so hard that he fractured the vertebrae on her neck before she finally asphyxiated. That's how he ended the first letter. The tall man stood and nodded to me in silence. Then I led him out the front door. Needless to say, I was shaken. Why would someone decide to share such a terrible story with me? Day 2. The tall man stood on my porch again at 3 in the afternoon, and when I answered, he handed me the second letter. As put off as I was by the first letter, I found that as I sat watching television that night, I couldn't shake the story from my head. I took the second letter and led its deliverer to the kitchen table once again. I wanted more. What word does justice to the nature of the second letter? Dark, twisted, desperate. The yellow paper was rife with drawings of fallen figures, huddled in corners and tiny bodies splayed out in pools of pencil grey. Smudges of graphite made all the little doodles appear in shadows. The second page of the letter was just one big drawing. A woman's face twisted up in suffering, her mouth hanging open and her throat packed full of maggots. Spiders wrapped up in her hair, tears whipping down from her face. Her hands grasped her own face, jagged nails dug into her cheeks. The second letter gave a name to the demon. Grimdeed. Grimdeed the Tormentor. I glanced up often from the letter to the man sitting across the table from me. Did he know the terrible tale I was being told? Is that why it was so important that he was present when I read it? His gentle smile never faltered, never faded as he looked idly around my kitchen. Fitz elaborated on his descent into madness, about the tearful call he made to 911 as he stood over the lifeless bodies of his family. He talked about the trial and how, even in the courtroom, Grimdeed sat behind him at the defendant's table and spoke curses about everyone present. Grimdeed demanded that Fritz try for the bailiff's gun at the conclusion of the trial, and Fritz did. This led to a brief beating. Grimdeed said that Fitz should stand at the door of his cell, screaming profanity and threatening the guards. This led to a longer beating. Grimdeed told Fitz to spit at the judge the next day at the trial, and as defeated as Fitz's poor conscience was by the demon's constant influence, he did. The letter ended with another drawing, this time of the whole courtroom strewn with slaughtered lawyers and the judge hanging above his stand. All of it was in the smeared grey of pencil lead with grimy fingerprints pressed into the yellow paper. On the third day, I was sitting on the bottom stair just inside the door, waiting for 3 o'clock. Right on time, the courier arrived, and without a word between us, I let him walk through the door. He set the third letter on the kitchen table and sat down. His smile was brighter today, wider than usual. I could tell by his demeanour that this must be the final letter. I peeled the envelope open and sat with a steaming coffee at my elbow. In his third letter, Fitz talked about his days in prison, how, even in his incarceration, Grimdeed the Tormentor haunted him. He described how slow the death penalty process took, how he may die of old age in his prison cell long before an execution date was set. His penmanship became a barely legible scribble. His writing was frantic. He was a rat trapped in a cage, being prodded constantly by the cruel musings of Grimdeed the Tormentor. Fitz's sanity had long passed. He doodled himself, smearing something on the walls of his cell with his hands. I assume feces. Fitz said he was thinking about ripping his ears off in hopes that he would deafen himself and escape Grimdeed's whispers. The yellow pages had stains on them from Fitz's tears. He apologised for that. Then, on the last page, a spark of hope. As if he had stopped and gathered himself. His handwriting once again became clean and clear. The last line read, "Grimdeed has grown bored with me. Being locked up like this, I can't do much evil worthy of him. He told me how to end my curse. Well, no, the curse never ends exactly. This is why I'm writing to you. To pass the curse along to its next victim. But since I still have a sliver of humanity left in me, I'll at least tell you now how it's done. You make someone else pick up Grimdeed's curse the same way I did, by inviting him into your home 3 times. My heart froze. I didn't dare to breathe as I looked up from Fitz's taunting signature at the end of the letter to find the tall man staring into my eyes. His eyes were an endless black. That cruel grin was wider than ever. "Light the letter on fire," Grimdeed demanded. A few days ago, I woke up with a sharp pain in my eye. I could barely focus on anything. After forcing myself through my morning routine, I ended up calling a cab and heading over to the doctor's office. After sitting in the waiting room for an inordinate amount of time, I was called back and the nurse ran some tests. While I was waiting in the examination room, I noticed my vision getting blurry and called out for a nurse, but no one came. I cannot tell you how long I was in there, but with the pain getting worse by the second, each moment seemed like an hour. I couldn't tell you when the doctor came in. I passed out at somewhere along the way. I vaguely remember being loaded onto a gurney, but aside from that, my mind is blank. I woke up the next day on a critical care unit, I was hooked into all these machines and I had tubes coming out of my nose and mouth. It was very uncomfortable, but not nearly as bad as my eye. I couldn't see out of it. In fact, I could barely see out of my good eye. I tried to reach up and grab my eye, and it was about that time I noticed the leather restraints attached to my wrists. I sat there, in the dimly lit hospital room for much longer than I cared for. My screams were muffled by the tubes in my mouth. When a nurse finally peeked in to check on me, it was all I could do to struggle and make muffled whimpers. She didn't even take notice of me. After changing out of my sailing bag and making a scribble on a clipboard, she went back into the hall and closed the door. As the light began to fade from what was left of my good eye, I started to wonder if I was dying. No such luck. The pain continued. I could still hear the beeps and hums of the machines that had been hooked into me, and I could feel all the sensors and tubes that had been attached or inserted into my body. Being unable to see sent me into a frenzy. I writhed against the restraints until I felt one of my hands break loose. I ripped the tubes out of my mouth and let out a short scream that turned into a coughing fit. After prying my other hand loose, I clumsily stood up and felt my way through the dark until I found what felt like a door, and pulled at it until it came open. I felt a firm hand on my shoulder, which was accompanied by a male voice telling me to calm down and go back to bed. I wasn't having it. I had to get out of there. I felt the hand tighten its grip on my shoulder, and I started flailing my arms in his direction until I broke free, at which point I kept one hand on the wall and tried to move as quickly as I could down the hall. Several orderlies tackled me to the ground, and one of the last things I remember is getting a shot in my hip. For a moment, there was nothing. I couldn't see, feel, hear, or smell anything. I guess I was asleep, but for the first time in 2 hellish days, there was no pain. When I woke, my hands were again in restraints. My eye wasn't hurting anymore, and I could make out slivers of light from what I could only assume was a bandage over my good eye. I didn't feel anything in my bad eye. Nothing. I called out for help and was again reminded of the feeding tube. I started struggling again, hoping to break free, but was met with a familiar firm hand on my shoulder. The bandage was pulled from my good eye, and my doctor was standing over me with a somber look on his face. So, good news and bad news. The good news is we were able to save your right eye. It seems that some of the eggs had been able to make it to that eye, but we were able to clear it up pretty quickly. The bad news is that we had to remove your left eye. By the time you came into primary care, the eggs had already hatched and the larva had already started eating your eye. He tried to keep a straight face as he described it, but I could tell he was just as disgusted as I was. He pulled a feeding tube and got me a small cup of water before asking, "So, any questions?" "Two things," I said as I tried to compose myself. "Why am I in restraints? And what do you mean eggs?" My voice was as panicked as it was loud. The doctor shook his head and then said, "There were several times throughout the night where you tried to claw out your own eye or pull out the feeding tube. It was for your own safety." He paused and said, "Have you been to South America recently or been in contact with someone who has?" "No," I said, shaking my head. He continued, "Did you order eye drops or contacts on the internet?" Getting frustrated with his hesitation, I finally grunted out, "Answer the damn question!" He looked at the floor for a second and said, "Calm down, we're just trying to figure out where you got exposed to the insects." Insect? What the hell? I interrupted. After a few seconds of shouting and cursing, I calmed down enough to hear him say, "Yeah, we identified it as an insect native to Brazil. It bites the eye and lays eggs in the soft tissue. The larvae hatch and burrow deep into the eye. After eating the eye, the insects burst out of the socket and fly off to infect other hosts. It's actually pretty rare for them to infect humans." "What the hell, Doc?" I said as I felt a tear coming out of my remaining eye. After another day of observation and being given cleaning instructions for the empty socket and some pain pills, the hospital sent me home. By the time I got back to my apartment, the entire building had been sealed off in plastic. I called a number that had been posted next to the gate, and a woman claiming to be from the CDC told me to wait there and that a car would be by. No one would give me any answers, but they put me up in a decent hotel and told me they would help me find a new apartment. More than anything, I just wished they would tell me what they did with my cat. I hadn't seen Mr. Boots since a couple days before my eyes started hurting. He was making some weird noises that day. Working as a director has been a lifelong dream. As a child, watching movies was my favourite pastime. I would try to imitate my favourite directors by filming movies of my own. For my 13th birthday, I asked for a video camera. I remember feeling like an actual director as I carried my camera around and filmed whatever I could find. Filming wasn't just an activity for me. It was my passion. In film school, I was learning the practices of successful directors. I was to watch as many films as I could. I survived on a steady diet of Coppola, Hitchcock, Lynch. I'd seen all of the classics. I watched and rewatched them. I studied and took notes. There wasn't anything left to watch. I resorted to short films, independent projects. I would browse the internet for hours searching for my next one. Sometimes the task became grueling. Each storyline was different, but all of them felt like the same movie. I wanted something fresh, something new. It was in this moment of desperation that I stumbled upon a video on YouTube, except it wasn't like the other ones. It struck my attention because the video didn't have any views. Perhaps because it was titled only with one number and the thumbnail was just of an image of a young woman sitting down on a couch. After hours of idle searching, my interest was sparked. As the thumbnail suggested, the video showed a woman sitting on a couch. Her body was facing forward, but her face was turned towards what appeared to be a television. She was in a living room. Occasionally, she would pick up the remote from her side and change the channel. The video was shot in such a way that it appeared the camera was fixed on her, even as she moved. It was an unconventional method of filming, and I hadn't seen it used often, so I was already gripped. I glanced at the time indicator. The length of the video was 5 minutes, yet 3 minutes into the video, nothing of importance had seemingly happened. I skipped to near the end, and the woman remained sitting on the couch. Puzzled yet intrigued, I continued to the next video titled 2. In this video, a woman cut up vegetables on a counter in what appeared to be a kitchen. After she was finished, she transferred the vegetables from the cutting board into a bowl and then began adding various seasonings. It continued on for 5 minutes, just as the last video, as she ambled around the kitchen. I proceeded to the next video titled 3, in which she appeared to be vacuuming the carpet of the living room. I didn't plan to watch each 5-minute video. so I looked into the user's channel to see how many videos had been posted. My jaw dropped when I reached the end of the page listing the videos uploaded. 50 videos had been filmed, each apparently consisting of 5 minutes of everyday household chores. Despite feeling overwhelmed, I continued watching. I couldn't just leave this discovery behind. My curiosity was aroused. Each video was practically the same, consisting of the same woman carrying out everyday tasks. I made my way through each one. I didn't watch them fully, and skipped to the next one before I became bored. It wasn't until towards the end of the series that I noticed the videos started to take a different, somewhat darker direction. In this particular video, the woman was lying in bed. It was dark, but I could see that her eyes were closed and she didn't appear to know she was being filmed. The camera was positioned above her, filming her as she tossed and turned relentlessly. A feeling of unease came over me as I watched. I was unsettled, yet also filled with a morbid curiosity. The videos appeared to become more and more intrusive. I watched her leaning against the wall in what appeared to be the living room. There was something different about her in this video. Her body appeared gaunt, as if she hadn't been eating, and her face was a sickly shade of pale, as if she were ill. Her eyes were wide with worry, and her forehead was wrinkled in frustration. She frequently looked around the room, darting her eyes from left to right, as if she were afraid someone was going to sneak up on her. Holding a phone to her ear, she spoke in a muffled voice. She spoke in a fast and rushed tone, occasionally stopping to catch her breath. I couldn't comprehend what she was saying, but I could make out the words, "watching me," and "what if something happens to the baby?" and "please help me." Towards the end of the call, her eyes filled up with tears and she began to cry, only stopping to gasp for breath in between sobs. In the next video, I watched as she frantically rummaged through her room. She looked under the bed, opened each drawer, and even removed the picture frames from the wall. When her search proved fruitless, she walked over to the bookshelf. Standing in front of the bookshelf, her body was facing the camera, and she was seemingly closer to it than she had been in all of the previous videos. She began removing books and tossing each one to the floor. It was then that I was able to see her face clearly. I suddenly recalled a missing person poster I had seen a few weeks ago while I was out. I could only remember a few vague details like that she was in her early 20s and she had a baby, but I distinctly remember her face. My heart skipped a beat upon realization that it was the same woman. The feeling of nausea filled my stomach. I gulped in fear as I watched the woman in the video suddenly freeze. For the first time, she looked into the camera. Her face became contorted in an expression of horror. She gasped, and her hands flew to her mouth. The video came to a stop. I sat, motionless in my computer chair. Any sense of curiosity I had was vanished. I didn't want to continue watching, but I knew I had to find out what happened. With a shaking hand, I reluctantly clicked the next video. It was the last one. A sense of dread filled me as I watched the screen intently, my eyes wide and bloodshot. Nothing appeared on the screen. It was entirely black. I could hear a faint and muffled sound in the background. A woman screaming in pain, and a baby crying in a shrill and high tone, as if it had been crying for a long time. It continued on for 3 minutes until the woman's agonized screaming turned into a groan and then completely dissipated after several minutes. The video came to an end. I immediately stood up from my seat and bolted across the house to find the phone. I called the police. I don't know how I managed to get the words out. My voice shook and my entire body trembled with fear as I waited. When the police finally arrived, I led them to my computer. It had automatically turned off from inactivity, so I restarted it and opened up the browser. I tried to find the video again, but the search was fruitless. I quickly grew panicked. My eyes widened in disbelief when I saw that the computer history had been completely cleared. I searched using every possible method I knew, but it was as if the video had never existed. The police officers scoffed at me. I begged them to listen to me and to reconsider what I had to say, but they didn't believe me. The police won't believe me. My family won't believe me. No one believes me. I feel like I'm losing my mind. With each passing second, this feeling of dread inside me grows stronger. I haven't been able to sleep for days. I lie awake every night, afraid that whoever or whatever killed that woman is going to come for me. It could be watching me right now. My wife had been a godsend since I was sick. My doctors were really stumped at first, but we figured it out. The doctor prescribed me a medicine to take every 6 hours. It's supposed to help with the pain. My wife is an excellent nurse. At first, I hated to have her do it. My illness was turning me into a person I didn't recognize. Moody, temperamental, and very impatient. But my wife just kept going, giving me these tiny blue and green pills that would cure my ails. But my symptoms worsened. My nose started to bleed profusely. My wife left a message with the doctor, but no response. I started developing bruises and my stomach was always upset. The doctor apparently thought this could be solved with an increase in medicine, so I began taking it every 4 hours. I smiled pitifully at my wife, thanking her for her devotion and swallowing that bluish pill. She ran a gentle hand through my hair. A fistful of hair came out along with it. I cried and cried, but I really just needed to be alone. I sent my wife to the store. A few minutes after she left, I realized I needed to take a dose. I weakly climbed out of bed and made it to the medicine cabinet. There were my little blue pills scattered loosely around the cabinet. I grabbed the pill bottle and unscrewed the cap so I could dump them back in. And that's when I saw it. My pills were white. The shed was old and weather-beaten and leaned to one side. It sat at the furthest edge of the backyard, backed up into the thick woods that designated the end of the Warrens' property. The only thing contemporary about the shack was the deadbolt lock meant to keep out everyone but the family patriarch Jack Warren, who guarded its contents as if it were precious religious artifacts. 10-year-old Evan Warren knew the rule about staying away from the shed, but being a kid, he was achingly curious about what his father was hiding. Mother never talked about it, and always changed the subject when the shed was mentioned. Evan and his younger brother Jeb were playing catch in the backyard on a crisp fall day when Jeb missed the pass and the ball tumbled across the grass, coming to a stop near the shed door. When Evan went to retrieve the ball, he noticed that the door was ajar. "Whoa," said Evan as Jeb joined him. "Look!" "Dad must have forgot to lock it." "Come on," urged Evan. "Let's check it out." "No way, Dad will skin us alive if we go in there." "Chicken, I'm going in." A frightened Jeb ran back to the house without looking back. That night, Jeb came downstairs to dinner and saw 3 place settings instead of 4. His mother's eyes were red, as if she'd been crying. His father was carving a roast. "Where's Evan?" Jeb asked. "Don't know anyone named Evan," answered his father. "And neither do you." Since the atmosphere changed, the land dried up. Farming was basically impossible, and people were starving. Andrea held the bundle tightly, racing deeper into the house to hide it. She could hear the footsteps outside, the telltale crunch of arid landscape. They were getting closer. The Wanderers. The Wanderers traversed the land looking for food. They were vicious. They would kill for beans. Andrea shuddered, feeling a nervous trickle of sweat skate down her spine. When she reached the closet, she knelt down and pried open a trapdoor with her broken, bloody fingernails. She laid her bundle on the floor of the trapdoor and covered it. She raced back to the living room, just as the Wanderers broke down the door. "Heard you had food," one said, licking his lips. Andrea shook her head vigorously. A jagged, toothy smile lit his face as he reached out his trembling hand to point. "You lie!" he hissed. "I have nothing!" They stomped through the house. Finding nothing, they turned to leave. A baby's cry broke through the silence. He smiled. "I knew you had food." It was 1 a.m. and Guy Halverson sat in his dark living room. The accident early that evening kept playing over and over in his mind. The light turned red, but he was in a hurry and accelerated. An orange blur came from his right, and in a split second, there was a violent jolt. Then the bicyclist rolled across his hood and fell out of sight on the pavement. Horns blared angrily, and he panicked, stepping on the gas and screeching away from the chaos into the darkness, shaken and keeping an eye on his rearview mirror until he got home. "Why did you run, you idiot?" he thought to himself. He'd never committed a crime before this and punished himself by imagining years in jail, his career gone, his family gone, his future gone. Why not just go to the police right now? You can afford a lawyer. Then, someone tapped on the front door, and his world suddenly crumbled away beneath him. "They found me." There was nothing he could do but answer it. Running would only make matters worse. His body trembled. He got up, went to the door, and opened it. A police officer stood under the porch light. "Mr. Halverson?" asked the grim officer. He let out a defeated sigh. "Yes, I'm terribly sorry, but I'm afraid I have some bad news. Your son's bike was struck by a hit-and-run driver this evening. He died at the scene. I'm very sorry for your loss." I'm so tired. I'm starting to drift in and out of sleep without noticing. Sometimes I'll be wide awake, and suddenly I find myself in the kitchen with no recollection of how I got there. Was I asleep? My mind isn't registering sleep at this point. I don't ever remember my dreams. I used to have terrible night terrors, but I'm pretty sure those have been over for years now. I certainly wouldn't know now that I can't even recall going to sleep. Have you ever had a lucid dream? You know you're dreaming and you can do things in your dreams you couldn't do in real life. The last dream I remember is one where I was cooking. I was in the kitchen, slicing up vegetables on the mandolin. It hardly registered that I cut part of my finger until I saw it on the board. Horrified, I looked back at my hand. The finger had regenerated, but felt extremely warm. I remember laughing. I knew I was dreaming and began thinking I could do whatever I wanted because I could regenerate. I cringed as I tested this theory by cutting off a whole finger. When I looked back at it, there it was, attached to my hand, but feeling so hot. The next test was to see if I could fly. Something I always wanted to try, but I would need to get to the roof first. I only made it a small distance before I was slipping on a wet spot. Slamming my head against the floor, I woke up out of my dream. In the kitchen, in a pool of blood, with 2 missing fingers. The antique mirror couldn't have been more perfect for the wall above a bedroom dresser. It took Janine 3 months of searching to find just the right one after her ex took the previous mirror out of spite. Prick, she thought, smiling. You lose. That night, her Kindle on her lap, a glass of wine on the bedside table, Janine relaxed against the pillows, engrossed in her latest novel. Her phone rang and she checked the number. It was her ex, Randy. Her eyes rolled and she disconnected, not in the mood for any more drama. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw a shadow move in the mirror. The only light in the room was from a small lamp on a bedside table, and she got up and went to her new purchase. At first, everything seemed as it should, but soon, an image formed of her ex-husband sitting on the bed, holding a handgun, and looking agitated. Her eyes widened and she turned around, but no one was there. And when she turned back, the image was gone. As a person who believed in premonitions, Janine called her ex back, but there was no answer. Panicked, she dialed 911 and told the dispatcher she thought Randy might be suicidal. He was a prick, but they had history, and she didn't want to see him do this. 15 minutes passed, and a phone rang. This is Officer Duncan. Miss Milano, we've located your ex-husband's car. Yes? She asked, watching the doorknob turn. It's parked in front of your house. When I was a young child, my family lived in a trailer on the edge of town. My bedroom was a glorified closet where my bed, a mattress that sat on the floor, rested under the window. Directly across from my bed was a small walk-in closet that was supposed to have a sliding door, but didn't. My parents put a nightlight on the wall next to my bed. Each night, I'd beg my parents not to close the bedroom door. I was 6, and the door would get jammed in the frame, making it very hard to open. Most nights, I was lucky and they would leave the door cracked. However, some nights, the door would be closed. The trailer park was loud at night. The locals would stand in their yards drinking and carousing. As strange as it may sound, I welcomed this noise. There was this tall mirror in the closet, and on the nights where the bedroom door was closed and the neighbours were being quiet, I would see this ghastly figure standing in the mirror and hear it tapping on the glass. Grey skin stretched tight across his bony face and toothless grin. The very sight of him was enough to make me pee myself. I'd lay there quietly, with a blanket pulled up to my head, staring at the man tapping on the mirror. He'd whisper loudly, "Hey, little boy, let me in." I don't remember if this ever stopped, but my parents ended up buying a house on the other side of town around the time I started first grade. I had my own bedroom, and my own bedroom door had a closet. Several years passed and I had all but forgot about the man in the mirror. I was at a sleepover with my friend Devin when I heard a very familiar whisper. "Oh, hello, little boy. Long time no see." I opened my eyes and, without moving my head, I darted my eyes around the room. There, in the vanity mirror, I could make out the faint silhouette of a man. He moved quickly and left the mirror, though I could still see him in my peripheral vision. I realized that he wasn't in the mirror, but rather that the man was standing outside the window. I turned my head and locked eyes with him as he pulled a single, bony finger to his lips. His other hand reached through the glass like it was water and went to unlatch the window itself as I let out a blood-curdling scream. Devin woke up and turned on the lamp. The light in the room made it all but impossible to see out the window. There, in the blackness of night, I lost sight of the creepy man, and in the process, got punched in the arm by Devin, who was less than accepting of my explanation that there was a monster outside the window. Eventually, Devin turned off the lamp and I went to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, the window was standing wide open and a cool breeze blew across the bed. Devin was gone. His parents searched everywhere for him. His picture was shown on the news, and I told them the story of the creepy man in the window. No one believed me. Devin was missing for the greater part of 3 days when a search party trudging through the woods found the remains of a 13-year-old boy in 2 pieces, cut in half, on a concrete slab in the middle of the woods. Devin was buried the next day. His parents wouldn't let me go to the funeral. My parents grounded me for lying about the old man. They remembered my stories from back in kindergarten and thought me crazy or a liar. Probably both. For the rest of my 7th grade year, I would hear other kids whisper about how I was the last person to see Devin alive. Time passed as it always did. I grew up and went to college. After settling down and getting married, I had a son of my own. For the better part of 5 years, I had absolutely no problems out with my kid. His name was Devin. I had nightmares about the man since 7th grade. I made it a point to bolt the windows in the house shut. I made sure that my son didn't have any mirrors in his room. I knew all too well about the things that went bump in the night. Years of inactivity had all but convinced me that I had just imagined the whole ordeal. But the death of my best friend was enough to make sure I remained vigilant. My son turned 6 the other day. We celebrated with cake and ice cream. That night, I put him to bed and read him a story. The monster at the end of this book, in my best impersonation of the Muppet Grover. He laughed and then his laughter got slower. Eventually, he fell asleep, clutching his stuffed bear as I put the book up on his chest of drawers. I turned on his nightlight and made sure his closet door was closed before leaving his bedroom door wide open and the hallway light on. I sat in the living room watching television, There was a thunderstorm raging outside. The emergency weather alert interrupted my episode of Arrow, and before I could get any information, the thunder boomed outside and the power went out. The rain beat against the window. Sitting in the dark, I lit some candles and went to put one on in my son's room, when the rain slowed down and weather started to mellow. My wife was still at work and I wasn't at all tired, so I sat in the candlelight reading a book when I heard a faint tapping noise on the window across from me. There was a man-sized shadow blocking the blue glow of the humid moonlight evening. The tapping continued, and I heard a raspy whisper. "Not so little boy has a little boy. Let me in." I reached into the hallway closet and grabbed a shotgun. With 2 barrels of 12-gauge buckshot, I walked out the front door and stared at the man. He stood there, tapping on the window and paying me no mind. Without hesitation, I pulled both triggers and peppered him with buckshot. Metal pellets beat against my house and went straight through the man as I heard my son shout in his sleep. "That wasn't very nice, naughty not-so-little boy," the man whispered with a raspy voice. I ducked inside the house and locked the door behind me as the man turned to follow. The tapping on the window became pounding on the door. "Let me in! Let me in!" The whisper became a hoarse scream. My son, now wide awake and holding onto my leg for dear life, started bawling his eyes out. The man at the door shouted, "Those are my tears! Let me in! Let me in!" I grabbed 2 more shotgun rounds from my pocket and reloaded the gun as bright lights hit the tiny window on the front door. I looked away for a moment, and the man was gone. Moments later, my wife turned the key and opened the door as I stood there, shotgun in hand, with our son crying at my feet. There is no viable explanation on earth for that one. She didn't ask any questions. After getting me to put down the gun and grabbing our son, she walked out the door and I never saw either of them again. She called the police from the car and I was taken into custody for psychiatric evaluation. I sat there through one session after another, with doctor after therapist after social worker, explaining that a man was trying to break into the house and that I had shot at him. For whatever reason, no one believed me. I guess in retrospect, telling a psychiatrist that the monster that lived in your closet as a child showing up on your doorstep 25 years later is a bit of a stretch. Still, it happened. The worst part of knowing the truth is that no one wants to believe it. This thing stalked me as a child. It killed my best friend, and now it was stalking my son. And all I could do was sit in the loony bin, helplessly waiting to either be released or sent to a different facility. The worst part is that there is a little window in the door to my room here at the hospital. Sometimes at night, when the hallway is dark and the moonlight outside my window is bright enough, I can barely make out his toothless grin smiling in the reflection on the door. I'll look up and see him, standing at the window as he taps lightly on the glass and whispers, "Invite me in. Your son was delicious." Sometimes, you may or may not like what you see online. It may be shocking, but it may be amazing. In some cases, it's incredible. But in others, it's deadly. A couple months ago, I decided to Google myself. I saw the usual Facebook and Twitter links when a site caught my eye. The site had my full name and my name is not common. When I clicked the link, it brought me to a blank site, no posts whatsoever. I clicked the moderator's profile, and I saw that they liked the same music that I liked, they do the same things that I do, and I'll admit, I was a bit shocked. So I decided to bookmark it, and possibly check back on it sooner or later. About a month or two later, I decided to go back. It had random diary entries like, the weather was depressing today, and I ordered Chinese, and I went to a concert tonight. But as time went on, I noticed some things that stuck out. The person lived in the same city as me. I mean, isn't that a bit weird that two people with the same rare name live in the same city? I then began to notice some incredibly odd coincidences. In an entry, I saw that the person went to one concert that I went to. I mean, it's quite odd, but it could be a coincidence because thousands of people went to that concert. I decided to do a bit of digging, find out some more things about this person, and in all honesty, some things were too close for comfort. The person mentioned their rabbit and a name. Funny, my rabbit had the same name as her. They mentioned that someone rear-ended their car and attached a picture of their car. Strange, someone rear-ended my car, and it's the same car. Hell, it's even the same license plate. One day, when I checked the site, I saw that people have been writing comments saying, "Happy birthday." That day was also my birthday. I decided to post a comment just because, but when I went to write something, there wasn't a place to write your comment. It was just a flat page. In other words, someone had gone out their way to make their site look like people have been visiting it and making it look interactive. That's strange. Who the hell would do that? I thought to myself. I decided to send an email to the owner. "Hi, this may seem odd, but we have the same name. I never thought that someone else had the same name as me." It was just a friendly email, nothing that extreme. The next day, I decided to look at the website. It was gone. Someone deleted it. I checked my inbox, and there was one email. When I opened it, a chill went down my spine. It said, "I found you."